All right, water wisdom, becoming hydro-sapiens. Well, we are basically hydro-sapiens, but we're going to learn a bit more about that. And Albert St. Georgi, right, one of the great water researchers and cell biology researchers, he said there is no life without water because water receives and transmits etheric energies. It's far more than just hydrogen and oxygen. People think water is H2O, but as we're going to see, it's far more than that. H2O is what you get when you break it into pieces, but when it's together, it's the living soul of the universe. Okay, science these days, right, where it's at. We call it scientism. They believe all sorts of things they can't prove. And it's all based on Newton seeing the apple fall out of the tree. So ask the question, what if Newton asked, how did the apple rise above the earth with its beautiful colors, its life-giving capacities? You know, we're alive, it's alive, we're perceiving this, but all science knows is the inertialistic properties of dead things falling to ground. And we can blame Newton for that and a few other things, which we might get to. But so, you know, the complex structure, it's gone. So where would science have gone had this question been asked, you know, back then? What's modern science? You know, this is Werner Heisenberg. So what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. So all we know is how we think about it. So today's science is a meter-reading science. Everything that science does can be done by a one-eyed, colorblind person, right? They can read the graphs and do all the assessments and do the math. And that's all they need to come up with the correct answers to fit within that paradigm. But walk out in nature, you know there's something far more than works on the meters. So it's basically led to a lack of comprehension of the deeper nature of reality and our beingness within it. So, but how do we know this? There's this concept called anamnesis, you know, recollection of ideas which the soul knows from previous existences, especially by means of reasoning. So this comes from Plato, right, from the dialogues with Socrates. You know, the paradox of knowledge, right? You want to know something, well, you're searching for virtue or you're searching for wisdom. I want to know what is wisdom. Well, if you don't know what it is, how do you know what it is when you find it? You know, this was this paradox that they would discuss. So they came up with this concept, anamnesis, that, you know, in the Platonic sense, everything comes from this ideal realm, and all these perfect ideas already exist there. So when we reach a state of wisdom, we've remembered ourselves with that phase of this ideal realm from the Platonic side. So this is what we're searching for. We want to connect with the archetypal sense of things beyond what you can read on the meters. And it brings us to a stage of what we call noesis, the highest type of knowledge, you know, knowledge of the eternal forms, ideas as archetypes of manifestation. So many people worked in this direction. You know, some say we could never attain it, like Immanuel Kant, right? We could never know the thing in itself. Whereas Goethe said he was the perfect example of someone who proved Immanuel Kant wrong, because through his methodology, which Rudolf Steiner used as the basis for his spiritual sciences, not only can we know the archetypes, it's our birthright and essential nature to begin participating in these processes in nature. So it's our higher sense of soul we're going for here. So how do we do that, right? It sounds great just to hear about it. How many here have heard of the liberal arts, the trivium and quadrivium? This is the proper processes of thought. So we'll start, and this is the 3, 4, 5 triangle of Pythagoras. This actually gives us an idea of a complete functioning system. And through this system, you can attain the highest knowledge of the inner realms. So the trivium, right, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So it's not grammar, not just you use proper grammar, which of course helps when you're trying to transmit thoughts, but it's really the input phase, who, what, when, where. And then once you're done with, and that's both objects and events and objective reality, or true ideations that arise within your mind. And then second one, logic, right? Sorting all that out, making sure everything fits. You haven't like picked up any wrong information, and you sort it out. And then when you've done that, then basically you have rhetoric, which is wisdom, output. So it's input, processing, output. It's really simple stuff. But you need to do it in proper process and with a clear state of mind, not prejudiced by basically impressions or teachings or anything, so if you want to follow this. So what are you assessing? The quadrivium, that's objective reality. So arithmetic, real and abstract numbers. I like to use the example of the number 5. So you can have 5 apples, but you can also take an apple and cut it across its axes, and you have the 5 pattern within it. We can spell that P-H-I-V-E, 5, because it is the phi. So that's the qualitative sense. So both of those come under the realm of arithmetic, trying to understand that. And then geometry, numbers in space. At the basis, sacred geometry, but any geometry, assessing relationships. Then music, or harmonic analysis, numbers in time. And we bring all those together, cosmology, numbers in space and time. That's how we assess reality using the trivium. And at the bottom, we have the 5 senses. My old teacher, Riley Crabb, used to say, the input of the 5 senses don't provide any answers to the questions of life. He said, they only pose more questions. And I used to agree with him until I came across Goethe's work. And Goethe said, the senses don't deceive, the judgment deceives. So when we train our senses properly along these lines, we can begin to really connect with the archetypal forms in nature. And of course, modern day, everybody's into quantum stuff, right? Steiner spoke of the subsensible and supersensible. So basically, the subsensible realm is a mirror image of the natural processes. So if we look at from the quantum realm, quantum potential is like the seed, right? It can give forth the whole plant. Valence shell excitation is like the germination, right? It starts coming out up to the stable orbitals, the vegetative growth. Quantum, coherence, reproduction, because you're dealing with other plants, other entities. And then quantum superposition, then you have all the seeds, right? It's not just the one quantum potential, but it's the multiple potentials of all of them. So we can see that, sure, there's a reality to quantum physics. They can engineer equipment. They can figure things out from it. But there's a higher side of it, which is functioning in nature. And that's the side that we really need to work towards for any sort of new bioharmonic technologies, which is our goal. And I always like this quote from Enrico Fermi. He said, if I could remember all the names of these particles, I would have become a botanist. And this is Veda Austin's work. She's a good friend from New Zealand. I know many of you are familiar with her. Harry was speaking of her. So she puts a sunflower seed in the petri dish for 1 minute and then freezes it, and she gets the pattern of a sunflower. And I love this little quote from Hilton Hotima. Let the flowers be an example to expound the mystery. They charm our eyes and make us drowse with their perfume. The flower is born of the seed, fallen into the earth. Even so, when our body returns to the substance of the earth from which it is made, the spirit that is held captive is breathed out like a perfume into the higher realm. For the spirit was contained in the body, just as the perfume was contained in the seed. And we can see there from the archetypal sense, it's already there. The quantum potential is in the seed from the start. And so this is sort of an image I use in my lectures on Goethe's Metamorphoses of Plants and the Urpflanze, the archetypal plant, which we're not going to get in depth because our talk's on water, but I wanted to introduce a couple of these ideas because they're essential to the greater idea we're building here. So Kepler said, we may ask why all the trees and bushes, or at least most of them, unfold the flower in a 5-sided pattern with 5 petals. Some botanist might well examine the sap of plants to see if any difference there corresponds to the shape of the flowers. And of course, Lily Kalisko has done that work a century or two later. And Schauberger, each kind of plant produces its own kind of water. So we face as many different waters as the number of different plants. And we'll start to get a better idea of this. So water is everywhere. Water at the galactic center. So it's H2O masers. First they didn't know what they were. They were picking up these like molecular bands in their radio waves, radio telescopes, and they called it mysterium because supposedly there's nothing in space. There couldn't be anything. It's a vacuum, right? And then they realized not only H2O and hydroxyl OH, but formaldehyde and all these other organic molecules are basically lasing around the galactic center and star birthing regions. So there's literally water, organic molecules, carbon stars, everything around the galactic center, which is not a black hole. Black holes are nonsense. They're what's left over from Newton's watching the apple fall and not thinking about how it got up. There's active living plasmas at the cores of galaxies. So, yeah, discovery of water in the Milky Way central plasmoid by the James Webb Space Telescope. I had to change black hole to plasmoid to fit the lecture. So it's water everywhere. Stars found shooting water bullets. Solar wind creates water and stardust. Implications for life. Scientists discover the oldest, largest body of water in existence in space. Astronomers discover snow surrounding new star for the first time. Organic molecules found in the galactic core are stellar nurseries spitting out building blocks of life as well as stars. And of course, we know there's the ice moons of the planets. There's water everywhere, including the center of our cells. This is why I say we're hydrosapiens. So 99% of the body's molecules are water in a highly structured liquid crystalline state, crucial for cellular function, communication, and information transfer. So this structured water acts as a fractal antenna, enabling our complex biological systems. So DNA is intimately connected with structured water. So DNA is coated in geometrically arranged water attached by hydrogen bonds and has a pillar of structured water through the central column of the helix, influencing DNA shape, stability, and interactions. So healthy DNA is surrounded by good structured water, unhealthy DNA isn't. There's actually billions of water molecules around every DNA, every RNA. You know, the state of the water in our system controls like protein folding, and all functions of biology are based on this. So that's why, so we're truly crystalline water beings. So liquid crystalline water is the medium of life and the interface between energy, consciousness, and physical form. Our health, thoughts, and very being are reflected in our internal waters. So water, architect of biological materials. This is some more recent research, and what they're finding is like all organic materials basically formed using water, hydrating forces. So new discovery, water plays crucial role in defining biological materials. Water permeates these materials, giving rise to their solid properties. Researchers coined the term hydration solids for this new class of matter. So the key findings, water molecules and biological materials push against the materials molecules. This hydration force is the main factor determining the material's properties. So simple equations can now predict properties like elasticity based on water's influence. So this applies to 50 to 90% of the living world, wood, fungi, plants. So it answers a lot of questions, but it shows it really is water's world. We are water. We're 99.9% water molecules. And water is a fractal antenna, and we'll get into fractal antennas more as we go on, but just from here. Anybody here familiar with what a fractal antenna is? They actually use them in phones and things, so you don't need big giant antennas now. They use fractals and can build little things. So basically water is, and we'll show pictures of them later on in the presentation. So water's molecular structure allows dynamic hydrogen bond networks, enabling the formation of coherent domains and molecular clusters. This provides a basis for storing and transmitting information and energy. As a liquid crystal, water is highly responsive to electromagnetic fields, especially sensitive to VLF, very low frequency radiation. Its quasi-crystalline structure provides fractal geometry on multiple scales, a key property of fractal antennas for wideband EM interactions. So basically modifying the water bonds with electromagnetic fields or Sutter fields or thought, that's going to be changing all of us. And as we're going to see, we're connected into the universe with this. So water and consciousness, Linus Pauling, I knew about him for a long time because of his work with vitamin C, but he did a lot of work on water and consciousness, and he found out, he believed in his research that water is responsible for the reason anesthetics work, that anesthetics form microcrystals in brain water and disrupt normal neural function. So he shows water's unique properties arise from hydrogen bonded structures. The thing is, though, is it's very possible that this may be how psychedelics operate as well, that they form certain crystalline structures around the receptors in our brains to do it, which is all consciousness is. As Dennis McKenna says, he says, you can't do drugs. He says, we are drugs. He said, all the neurotransmitters in our body would technically be illegal if you were making them in a lab. So, yeah, our what causes consciousness? What is it in that sense? So water is essential in it. And this is from Carly Newday. She wrote The Water Codes, if anybody's read that, a brilliant book. It's not simply water that is necessary for life. It is structured liquid crystalline water. And we are full of it, responsive, interactive, and dynamic liquid crystal water, called the world's most malleable computer, equipped with the most complex fractal antenna network system. So I can say water is like the master key to biohacking in a sense as well. So let's think the nature of water. So, yeah, what is water? It's like, even from a philosophical sort of sense, it represents a principle of movement and change, symbol of life and growth, as a fluid, flowing, and dynamic aspect of the physical world. So water has a transformative quality, allowing it to dissolve and change, substances it comes into contact with. It's a medium for life-sustaining substances, connecting it with forces of growth and evolution. It has a spiritual dimension as a symbol of the soul and unconscious. And I like this little quote from Dr. Emoto. He said, could be that the events we experience through our lives become memories recorded by water, which remain in our bodies and may be what we call the soul. So studying water, this gives us insights into the spiritual world. So water is a living organism. Natural spring water is naturally more effective than bottled water. We know the changes in the elements of water, right? Hydrogen and oxygen, right? So we think H2O. But in Rudolf Hauschka, anybody heard of seen Hauschka's, Dr. Hauschka's cosmetics and things? They have them in Rudolf Hauschka, he founded Walla Pharmaceuticals. He was a brilliant researcher. His book, Nature of Substance, is absolutely wonderful, as well as nutrition. So what he did is he renamed the elements based on their true properties. So he called hydrogen, he said, should have been named pyrogen because it burns the hottest. And it's pure levity. It's like the levity force drawing upward, where oxygen is like gravity. So, so you look out and you look at a blue body of water, you're basically looking at oxygen, which is moving around because of the hydrogen. So oxygen is an oxidizer, right? Pulls things towards gravity. So this is at the balance, which gives it all these special properties. So it's the interplay between them. It's the balance between gravity and levity, the fluidity and movement of water. So this is the fundamental aspect of its nature. So it's a symbol of the balance between spiritual and physical aspects of the universe. But in a very real sense, like from Hauschka's, he was trying to bring this in as an actual chemistry. And water's anomalies and abnormalities, it's weird stuff, right? It shouldn't, if you take oxygen and hydrogen, mix them with other similar elements, you don't get these same properties. If you look at hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen selenium, they're like gas at this point. I won't go too into the details here, but fundamentally, a lot of unusual behavior. And because of that, and that's why we're actually life is able to be sustained because of these. If it acted like other substances, we wouldn't have these living layers that like animals in water could basically operate within. Because the main absorber of sunlight in the atmosphere, is that 4-degree anomaly point, as they call it, where it expands above and below. Okay, so water, we're talking about the Platonic realm. So we're going to get into some of the inner shapings of water. Plato had a lot of ideas, there was archetypes of the good and the beautiful and things like that. But there's also these structural archetypes, the only regular polyhedra that can exist in our level of space. And he attributed them to elements, the cube to earth, the octahedron to air, icosahedron to water, the tetrahedron to fire, and the dodecahedron to the ether. And we're going to see that this actually has a lot to do with water structure. So this is Mei-Wan Ho's work, Golden Ratio in Water Structure. It basically forms pentagonal dodecahedral clusters, 20 molecules held together by hydrogen bonds. Quasi-crystalline symmetry reflects golden ratio geometry. So the 20 molecule cluster is fundamental building block, can scale up to 100 molecule cluster, size approximate golden ratio. So efficient packing of clusters, 26% void between clusters, which is around the golden ratio, void volume and golden ratio to cluster volume. So there's balanced rigidity and flexibility, so you get basically a balance between order and chaos. And Martin Chaplin, professor from University of South Bank, London. Interestingly, the golden ratio also appears in aqueous chemistry as a ratio between atomic and ionic diameters. So this is Martin Chaplin's work. What he's found, and they're doing like X-ray and electron diffraction, we can call it crystallography of water clusters. So he says, this is from his work, growing support for liquid water containing hydrogen-bonded clusters related to icosahedral clustering. So basically they started interlocking tetrahedrons, because the fundamental water molecule is a tetrahedron, probably because of the hydrogen action on it. And then the tetrahedrons form into icosahedrons in the middle, and then they form into larger pentagonal. And so there we have, the fire, the water, and the ether platonic solids all built into this. And what we see down on the lower right, so it's not like you've got these clusters and they're like lumps moving through the water. They move through what they call quantum electron exchange. So it's almost like the patterns are moving through water. You think of cymatics, you have the pattern physically in the water, but think of the internal nature of the molecules relating to each other energetically, and these patterns are like in the water. So like a glass of water is a single molecule it operates as, and these patterns are within it. The more coherent they are, then the more structured the water is. And Martin Chaplin said, Plato would not have been wrong to connect liquid structure in general to icosahedra as spherical atoms and molecules in the liquid phase prefer icosahedral clustering. So as we can see, there's an inner nature to the water that really makes it different, and it relates to the archetypal realm. So this is from Rustum Roy's work. So Maywan Ho, Rustum Roy, they're all drawing largely on Martin Chaplin's work. And this is just a sort of example, as Rustum Roy called it, a crude cartoon of a realistic paracrystalline section. So he's saying there's not just one structure, there's all these sort of structures that are moving through the water. They can persist over time, specific geometric arrangements determine the water's properties. And water can remember the structures it was exposed to. It says memory may persist even when the original substance is diluted away, which is, of course, we know homeopathy. So the key structures are tetrahedral, icosahedral, and dodecahedral. And the arrangements optimize hydrogen bonding depending on whatever biological materials are happening. And these clusters may explain the anomalous properties of water. So this gives us insights into cell biology, other maybe applications in energy, in which we'll see we can actually get energy out of these water structures. So this is Jerry Pollack's work, the fourth phase of water, his exclusion zone water. So this is how water operates in cells, according to him. And he's got quite a bit of research actually showing how this works. So here's basically a hydrophilic, water-loving is well it means. And this is, so they put these little plastic balls in here so that they can actually film this and show it. But this is EZ, the exclusion zone water, which is basically layered hexagonal water, which is interesting because Martin Chaplin, he disputes this because they can't find it on their X-ray or electron diffraction. But so there's some very interesting inner questions of how these things are operating, whether one model can support the other. But both models work for various things. And we know that Jerry Pollack's works because they can basically charge water and pull electricity back out of it, and that's how it works in cells. And it's basically, it can form, he's saying that that's probably part of what's happening with water tension. Water surface tension, when you see bugs walking along on the water. It's not just the very surface, but he figures that from sunlight, infrared radiation, certain other conditions will allow a certain layer of these hexagonal layers to basically occur on the top of the water, which is basically providing the tension because they're overlapping but slightly out of phase hexagons, which give it the strength. And so that's over on the left. It's from Jerry's work. But then we have over on the right, this is from Professor Pierre-Marie Robitaille's work on the metallic hydrogen sun. And what's interesting is what he's saying is metallic hydrogen surface of the sun, because the sun can't be a gas giant. he realized this. He was basically Robitaille. He developed the highest magnetic resonance imaging equipment. And when he was making his resonant tubes, he realized things weren't right with science and that Kirchhoff's law wasn't working, which meant that the line of thought he followed, following the logic, the sun can't be gaseous. It's got the wrong spectrum. So he started studying this, and he's come to the conclusion that the sun's a solid, it's a liquid sort of hydrogen, and the surface is like exactly the same as the easy layers. So as he says, the photosphere is comprised of metallic hydrogen, which has assumed the graphite-like layered hexagonal lattice. The internuclear distances within this lattice are such that the material is a semi-metal that is not highly conductive. Sunspots, faculae, and the convection zones are also comprised of metallic hydrogen, which has adopted a graphite-like layered hexagonal lattice. However, in this case, the internuclear distances decrease by such that the material becomes highly conductive, able to support strong magnetic fields in a solar dynamo. That's where you see sunspots. So it's two types of type 1 and type 2 metallic hydrogen on the surface of the sun. Why am I telling you this? Correlations between solar activity and river flows and lake levels. So top one's the Parana River in South America, and basically river flow levels and sunspot numbers. We can see direct correlation. And down here, here's the Mississippi River, basically river flow, solar irradiance, which is the total all wavelength addition of everything happening on the sun, as well as the geomagnetic index, which is Earth's reaction to that. So we see rivers are going up and down, and here's Lake Victoria over in Africa, and we see the same correlation. So rivers, lakes, they're going up and down with the sun, and there's actually a resonance between the structure of the sun and what's happening probably on the surface of the water, which is forming hexagonal, supposedly, according to according to Jerry Pollack, from the action of the sun on it. So we're seeing a connection. And this is from this, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this old Soviet research, heliobiology. And then again, this is the effects of solar activity on Earth's atmosphere and biosphere. And population dynamics and rhythms of epizootics among rodents correlated with solar cycles. Epizootics, that's just the fancy name for animal epidemics. So basically, depending on the water level, because they're going up and down with the sun, depends on how many animals there are, how the animal diseases are happening. So totally correlated, the water, the sun, biological activity. And here we see some more of this Soviet heliobiology research. At the top, I'm sure many of you have seen these pictures of the sun. These are extreme ultraviolet pictures. And these 171 angstroms is like 17.1 nanometers, right? So just move a dot over 19.5 nanometers, 28.4, 30 nanometers we're looking at. So these are the active ionized, like basically calcium and different types of iron ionization bands, which is where all the activity comes from. This is what they monitor on the sun for solar activity. But then we look at these graphs, dynamics of poliomorbidity in Riga between 1927 and 1959, and changes in solar activity in Wolf numbers, which is solar spot count, and indexes of sunspot area. So we're seeing that basically so-called viral diseases are following solar cycles as well. Dynamics of morbidity with polio, thousands of persons. In Japan, and variations of planetary index of magnetic disturbance, which follows the solar activity. This one here is scarlet fever in Leningrad, same thing, and then the bottom one is scarlet fever and geographic latitude. So depending on where you're at on Earth and what the sun's doing is whether or not you might get a so-called viral disease, which we know that all the activity now within the body is functioning on the water and water's relationship to what's coming out of the cosmos with that. Because what are viruses? Viruses are effects. So this is all in the extreme ultraviolet. So ultraviolet wavelengths are from 400 nanometers to 10 nanometers. Most viruses vary in diameter from 400 nanometers to 20 nanometers. So when the sun is putting out extreme activity in this, little things are like supposedly showing up in your system of the exact same size and correlation. Not in everybody, but we can see where epidemics, like influenza epidemics would happen in Europe and Asia on the same day. It's like somebody didn't sneeze across the steppes. How does that stuff happen? And even all over the world. So we know that there's a much bigger picture on that. This is Giorgio Picardi's work, The Chemist of the Sun. And what Picardi was doing is he was testing, because in chemical processes in industry, they're doing, might be very expensive processes they're doing with expensive ingredients. It took them a while to build those up, and they're doing these processes, and then it doesn't work, right? Somehow the timing was wrong. So they're trying to figure out, why is this? So they started testing basically colloidal precipitates, or precipitates out of colloidal solution, charted against solar and geomagnetic activity, inside and outside Faraday cages. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it didn't matter if it was inside or outside. So test D, activated water under copper. Test F, activated water open air. Test P, normal water under copper. So correlation between different chemical tests, F and D, and Wolf number. So that's, as we learned from the last slide, that's a count, as they call them, sunspot count. And here's just data analysis, effects of solar flares and chemical p-test. So it's just condensed data, but we're seeing there's a direct correlation between the changes in rates of chemical activity and solar and geomagnetic activity. And this last slide is really good because it's correlation between blood sedimentation and chemical test P. So what they were doing is, while they were doing these experiments for over a dozen years, right, every day, all over the world, a couple of labs in Italy and Russia and down in Kerguelen Island off in the Indian Ocean, just to see if the effects still happen down there. And they did. And they found, so they take chicken blood and they have these little like glass droppers and they put them in there, drip, and count how long it took to do it. The amount of work that went into this data that nobody even knows about is phenomenal. And that's why they found there's a direct correlation between the solar activity and blood sedimentation, which means we're thoroughly wired into the cosmos in such a way. But what's interesting, when this, I have a number of slides on him, but I just wanted to show him briefly as part of the thesis. When he analyzed 9 years of the best data, there was this big drop. On March 21st, there was like almost no reaction. Everything dropped out. And he's thinking, what in the world? And he's trying to figure it out. And he's making these models of the solar system and trying to figure out what's happening. And he realized that on March 21st, the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, because Earth is in an elliptical orbit around the sun, and on March 21st, it's coming up. It's pointing directly at the galactic center, and it's going the fastest in the orbit throughout the whole year. And at that point, that was the least reaction from the cosmos of anything, which is an interesting correlation because we're connected to the galactic center as well. And here's some other testing. Lily Kalisko, I know some of you here are familiar with her from the anthroposophic realm. So basically, she did these simple experiments. As Steiner said, I'll read this quote from Steiner. So as long as substances are in a solid state, they are subject to the forces of the Earth. But as soon as they enter the liquid state, planetary forces come into play. So Lilly set out to see if there's any truth to the old alchemical connections, gold in the sun, silver in the moon, iron Mars, lead Saturn. I did a documentary on her work with lead and Saturn during a Saturn conjunction when lead lost its crystallization properties. So basically, she didn't have the money to print in color. She apologized back in the day, but she had one plate. So this is kind of what they look like. So basically, she would liquefy a metallic salt like gold chloride or silver nitrate in water and put a piece of blotter paper in and let it rise up. And she would do like these day and night, above ground, below ground, with all sorts of stuff. Her Agriculture of Tomorrow does this as well. And then you look at the results. So gold chloride is interesting, standard sort of pattern, and we've got gold in the sun, her work. But silver is interesting. Silver nitrate by day, no matter how much, even if you supersaturate the solution, the paper will only rise to here and form a black line. But at night, when the sun goes down, it doesn't matter where the moon's at in the sky, but just when the sun's not ruling the sky, then the silver rises up. So this is the nighttime. So she did a lot of these experiments during eclipses and alignments. If we look here, gold chloride and silver nitrate by day, this is 18 June 1936, 5:52 a.m., so basically at dawn. And you can see the kind of characteristic gold and maybe the bit of the line from the silver. But then the next day, during eclipse totality, what happened is the silver rose above the line, right? Because the sun had lost its power. Because like during solar eclipses, the gold won't crystallize properly. It's cut off, just like this documentary I did on her work with lead. when Saturn went behind the sun, the crystallization properties of lead disappeared out of her work. That's how substances put into it, but just the water itself. This is Theodore Schwenk's work, basis of potentization research. So experiments to determine if water subjected to rhythmical shaking at different times of day would show consequent qualitative differences or remain the same. It's basically homeopathic succussion, right? As you would mix a thing in and kind of progressively dilute, but they were just doing it with water from 1947 to 1954. Some of these German scientists really did a lot of work, I tell you. You gotta love these guys. I so appreciate going through all their, so I'm just kind of showing some of the highlights out of it. So a series of identical glass flasks, they've standardized. Basically, then they would grow about 50 wheat seeds on each, about 10 centimeters. They would measure them and test them. Results were marked on a graph. So they showed noticeable variance in those. See, this particular curve maintained its characteristic pattern with minor interruptions for 7 years of experiments. But what's interesting, so table 1, the top one, examples, the curves, the top, curves for the period from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. waters on St. John's Day, 24th of June, 1953 and 54. So virtually identical, 53 and 54. And just to show a difference, these are days apart. It's like August and September. So you get all these regular variations, but the same day, a year apart, you're getting the similar showing. This is just water shaken during the day. Nothing else, just water. So as table 2, and this is just one they did with an eclipse, and they found, right, that the eclipse basically disturbed the pattern as well, right, that affected it. So we know what's ever happening in the cosmos, we're intimately connected. Whatever we think in our minds, our bodies are reacting to all of this constantly. So that's homeopathic effect on structured water, and this is Rustum Roy's work again. So basically, OH bending, it's not, HO is hydroxyl, like H2O is water, HO is just hydrogen and oxygen, but which is like alkaline. But this is basically OH is the band. So what they can do is, this is like a Raman spectroscopy. They basically shine like a laser at the water and can look at the bending, and they can see. So this is basically purified water. This is a standard thing that you will get in all the tests. So these are basically 3 different homeopathic things. This is 6x, 30x, and CM, which is like 100,000. So we can see that, so it's just water. 6x is still, but 30x, once you pass 23rd decimal dilution, Avogadro's number, there's nothing in there anymore, and certainly it's CM. So we're seeing that water has memory. It's picking something up, and even though it's pure water, something's reacting to it, whatever it is. Again, back to Rudolf Hauschka's work and his nature of substance. So homeopathic potency curves. What they find is that different dilutions of homeopathic remedies, and they test them on sprout seeds. He was using yeast because it was easy to do and turn a lot around. So here, this is benzoic acid. So he took synthetic benzoic acid and benzoic acid from benzoic resin. And these are the potency curves. So it's distilled water. So basically, it started getting a little bit reaction, but it sort of stayed the same. But we see that the natural had a very lively curve response at different decimal potencies. So his whole thing was this, the subsensible coal tar realm, as he put it. So he said, coal tar derivatives cannot, in our terms, be etherealized by the being stage by a rhythmical potentizing process. They have forfeited all relationship to cosmic and terrestrial rhythms and do not respond to a rhythmic challenge. Thus, it is fair to say that a basic biological difference exists between the natural and synthetic products. Despite their chemical identity, the benzoic acid experiments cited show this. So this diagram over on the right, this basically gives you an idea of his conception. So from the plant, we get everything, honey, oil, scent, healing substances, color, sugar, starch, cellulose, food, clothing. We can get the same stuff from coal tar chemistry. But what good is it, right? It's biologically negative, we could say. So here's Theodore Schwenk's water drop experiments, where basically there's a petri dish of basically glycerin, and then you put a water sample in there for whatever you want to put. And then you drop water down from above, and they take a photograph when the drop hits. So what we're seeing here is a single drop hitting water. So it basically shows the quality of water, that you can't maybe tell from chemical analysis. So this is good spring water. We see very lively, interesting little curves. And just go search on internet for water thread experiment. There's so much of this online that you can look up. So here's tap water. We can see, right, there's sort of restrictions. The quality's not there. And here's water that's had detergent in it, how it reacts to that. So we can see that there's this qualitative nature to water, which you can't see by looking at it, but we can test water by doing this. And at some point soon, we hope to be able to have these so we can actually demonstrate this live at presentations like this. We're moving that direction. Here's another wonderful water method I came across, the Hageless method of water crystals. And it's almost kind of quasi-alchemic what they're doing. They're doing sort of like a distillation, right? So they do a distillation of the water. So they get the water in the crystals and then they recombine them in a certain way. They've developed a special technique to do this. So it allows them to create these crystals. So this is Paris tap water. There's a neutral sample, interesting pattern. Spring water and structured water. So we can see the qualitative nature which is in them without going into detail of how exactly they do it. It's just basically distillation and reproduction. So this is the same method. So this is somebody's saliva, and this is somebody's saliva after like a 2-minute phone call. Before and after, before and after. So we can see, so it's just taking saliva out of somebody's mouth and running it through that test. So there's a website, worldinadrop.com, if anybody wants to look. They're working on cosmetics and things all based on this. There's so much of this work going on around the world. Of course, a lot of it started with Dr. Emoto. I know pretty much everybody's familiar with him. I had to throw him in just as part of the flow, but I always like this quote: water has a memory and carries with it our thoughts and prayers. As you yourself are water, no matter where you are, your prayers will be carried to the rest of the world. And as we know, to the center of the galaxy, because the water goes all the way there. So it's amazing how this does. And Veda Austin's work, I didn't want to get too into detail. She's coming through later this month through the UK and giving some talks here. But the fact that she can crystallize images into water through thought, through looking at pictures through it and discovering the hydroglyphs, it's absolutely fantastic work. And this is really important. The reason I was bringing her work in was this, because she brought this out, right, from the Chandogya Upanishad. When we drink water, it becomes divided in 3 parts. The grossest part of it becomes urine. That which is less gross becomes blood, and the finest part becomes prana, the vital force. So she's basically pointed out that this is how it works, because she does 3 phases of freezing. So when we see pictures of hers, it's the first phase of freezing. So the first freeze is the first stage. It's where water is taken out of the freezer when there's liquid on top and ice underneath. Drain the liquid water away and photograph the remaining ice. So this has first freeze, virtually no impurities. Is mostly 4th phase water, very clear, sometimes silvery, and emits light, of which I've captured in a few rare photos. It displays the most complex patterns. This subtle stage is like prana, spirit, or life force energy. Now, I've asked Veda, so I said, what kind of light did you use to get that on the photo? She goes, no, that was just that ice itself had it when I held it up to light. I was not using any special light. So the second freeze is a secondary layer of ice which forms above the first, and between them is liquid water. The second freeze has its own patterns which are secondary to the first, more density, which is akin to blood. It hovers over the first layer, offering its own information, but hiding the original message. The third freeze is when the liquid water in the middle freezes. Water is a solid when it has gone through all 3 phases. The third freeze holds the majority of total dissolved solids, salts, and minerals, and when it freezes, it darkens the look of the ice. This is like urine, right? Carries the minerals. All 3 exist within the solid form of ice. The secrets to life are in the subtleties. But anyway, I went and looked up the Chandogya Upanishad. I was kind of curious what verses were around. I thought the verse just before this, I just thought you'd appreciate this. When we eat food, it divides itself into 3 parts. The grossest parts of it become excreta. That which is less gross becomes our flesh, and the finest part becomes our mind. So eat good food. And just because we're speaking of homeopathy, this is some of Veda's homeopathic crystals. So she just put like a drop of homeopathic water into the Petri dish and freezes it. This is amazing work. She's like a modern day Lily Kalisko. I don't think people have realized the depth and magnitude of what she's bringing forth in her work yet. I know some people have. Totally worth following. And this is biophotons. This was really interesting. Somebody developed a thing called a somatoscope, which is like a special dark field, 30,000 X. And what they're finding is basically biophotons and water have a hexagonal six-pointed star. Center of spark, so this is at different magnifications coming up, and you can see, depending on the magnification it comes, and I've made this into this so you can watch it kind of an animated GIF going through. So a lot of people say, well, water is really light. Water's like, captures light, and we know there's this relationship between light and water, like we showed with the hexagonal, right, from the sun, and the hexagonal nature of water, and of course everybody knows what snowflake looks like. But the biophotons themselves in the water are this shape. And this is, I've realized when I was doing this talk, I started developing a thesis, which we're going to get into in the second part of this talk. But this made me think of, anybody here familiar with Dinshaw's spectrochrome system? I know some of you guys are for sure. This was the most fantastic healing system, Dinshaw Gandiali, the humble servant of suffering mankind, as he called himself. But he was fantastic, and he had this whole system based on this six-pointed star. And I lecture on this in my lectures on light and color, which we won't get into today because we're talking about water. But I've come to realize that a lot of the effects of these healing systems are basically now because of the water in our systems. They're affecting our water, and through the water medium of our beings is how they're operating. So, yeah, the spectrochrome system is fantastic, but there's your hexagon, your healing hexagon, which is the same as the biophotons within water. And this comes down to Goethe's theory of color, because basically Newton was wrong. There is no color in light. A prism doesn't break light into 7 colors. A prism creates 4 colors. This is from Goethe's work, from his Farbenlehre color theory. This is all you get out. The green always appears at a distance, and I've done experiments on this for almost 40 years. So you can project 2 spectra. This is through a slit, this is around an object. And you know, I totally forgot to throw the slide in. I've got it. But Theodor Schwenk did in Sensitive Chaos. He did these experiments where he was running water down a little chute, and he had a little gate, and he was running the water through the gate, and it was making a sinuous pattern with little vortices in it. And he removed the gate, and he put a post in the exact same spot and size of the gate, and you got the exact same sinuous patterns, but the vortices spun in the other direction. And Dinshaw said that green and magenta are the same wavelength, but they rotate in opposite directions in the ether. And we've actually been able to show this in spectrographic analysis of the tuned Dinshaw slide from back in the 30s and 40s. So I lecture on light and color as well, but I had to throw that in because that's what was trying to make this all interesting. And I brought some along, and maybe after the lecture can show. But I've actually brought prism and cards, and literally everybody believes Newton. I used to believe Newton stuff, right? And it actually takes you about 2 minutes, and you're going, how did anybody ever believe that stuff? So maybe afterwards we can, people can check some of this out and do it, just because it's always fun. Experience is the greatest teacher. So anyway, we can have an intermission. It's up to you guys. The day's dragged on a bit. I'm okay if you want to get up, stretch for 5 or 10 minutes, or we can do it like a democracy. We can take a vote, and then I'll decide like the democracies work. Why don't we take 10 minutes, a quick break so everybody can stretch their legs, and we'll come back. Hey, all right. Thank you for coming back. And as I say, to the more exciting half of the talk. So we mentioned Theodor Schwenk a few times here. This is his book, Sensitive Chaos. Highly recommend it. Thesis that the flowing forms and movements observed in water and air provide the archetypal patterns for basically organic forms in nature. And this book is a study of that. The water acts as sensitive chaos that receives and transmits formative forces from the cosmos, create living forms on Earth. We saw in the first half some of the actual reasoning behind this, from the university research on the inner water structure to just the effects that it has on the human body and its relationship. So rhythmic pulsing movements are fundamental to both fluid dynamics and life processes. So these reveal a profound unity between inorganic fluid movements and organic life forms. So we're interconnected. These are flow forms, which were actually developed here in the UK, John Wilkesworth. I love this stuff. So basically, designs inspired by natural water movements using path curve geometry to create specific flow patterns. What's path curve geometry? It's like sacred geometry, but using multiple curves and creating special forms within them, because this is how nature creates forms. So create rhythmic alternating vortex motions as water flows through a series of sculpted basins. Enhances water quality through increased oxygenation, self-purification, and vitalization. So its uses are water treatment, agricultural irrigation, health-inspiring water features. I mean, who wouldn't want one of these around their house? So effects include improving plant growth and enhancing water's life-supporting qualities. So working with water's natural flow patterns unlocks its beneficial properties, which I think we all know. And Victor Schauberger's work. Schauberger said we must look into unknown dimensions, into nature, into that incalculable and imponderable life, whose carrier and mediator, the blood of the earth that accompanies us steadfastly from cradle to the grave, is water. So I think everybody here pretty much familiar with Victor Schauberger's work. I did a documentary on him in '91 called Nature Was My Teacher. So I've been into him for a long time and studying his work and trying to emulate what we can derive from that. So basically, Austrian Forstmeister, I think everybody knows the story. We don't have to go too into detail. Just that the natural vortex motion is what brings life. And as he said, it was implosion versus explosion. Explosive forces like we use in automobiles and things cause destructive energy, heat. So basically, he was working on creating water purification as well as energy based on vortex motion. So anyway, he said, nature is not served by rigid laws, but by rhythmical, reciprocal processes. And this is showing the energy in water. This is Kelvin's thunderstorm or Kelvin generator. So basically, it's very simple. You've got two metal tubes, or here they have copper spirals, and they go into metal buckets or plastic buckets with metal in the bottom. So we've done these with like coils and copper plates down here. So this side's connected to this side, and this side's connected to this side. And when the water comes through, you get a lot of voltage. It's enough you can light a fluorescent light. It doesn't stay steady every time it flashes. So I've looked at potentially ways of using this for storing electrostatic energy. None of those ideas were really pursued, but it shows that there is an energy in water. And if we put energy into water, so spin directions, the electrical potential of water flowing from a narrow gap determines the direction of its rotations. The flow of negatively charged water rotates clockwise, and the flow of positively charged water is twisted counterclockwise. So this is like the Coriolis effect on Earth, where drains go different ways depending on what hemisphere may be related to this. So yeah, here water with a negative charge, narrow crack, twists clockwise. Same thing, different opposite charge goes counterclockwise. But also a surface tension, right? The electrical nature of the surface tension. Increase in positive potential is an increase in surface tension. Increase in negative potential is accompanied by decrease. So here's minus 200 volts, plus 200 volts, or millivolts. So I've been thought about this a little bit and wondered about how that surface tension might work with Jerry Pollack's concept of the sun, maybe, or light or infrared causing the surface tension. I haven't thought through. There's a lot of aspects of this science. I'm just kind of like a librarian. I'm showing you some of the books on the shelves. You have to dig into them yourselves and do it. There's a lot of amazing research going on around the world through a lot of researchers. So it's good just to keep an open mind. I'm just showing some of the ideas I've come across. So there's an electric water bridge. So here's an electric current flowing between two beakers. So water forms a coherent liquid crystal-like structure. So it's bidirectional flow. So actually, depending on the charge, the inside flow is going one way and the outside flow is going the other way. So it's like working its way around. So it appears stable despite its dynamic molecular movement. And seawater antennas. I was fascinated when I came across this. Navy's using these seawater antennas. So depending on the length and thickness, depending on the height, you can get UHF, VHF, HF broadcasts, all from the same jet of water. You can set up multiple jets at different heights to broadcast on different bands simultaneously. So even, like a submarine can come up, shoot up their antennas, give their broadcast, pull back down, go away. But now I was thinking about it, and I go, well, what in the world, whales? Because I know they have all these different antennas, so what are they doing? I thought, well, maybe communication, but no, they're just coming up and spouting. They must be doing some sort of atmospheric testing or feeling something. It's a sensory organ for sure. They're not just, why would they do that just to blow some water out? It doesn't really make sense. Nature doesn't do those things. So anyway, it's a fascinating concept of what may be happening with that. Especially when you think of whales jumping out of the water and grounding themselves, which is probably due to sonar experiments underwater, who knows what those poor things have to do. Earth's magnetic field perturbed by electric oceans. This research came out and disappeared real quick. I've fortunately saved a couple clips of it. Radical rethink of accepted geophysics. New research in the U.S. links variations in the Earth's magnetic field with the ebb and flow of the world's oceans. Given the practical importance of these field variations in navigation and atmospheric modeling, the implications of this new research extend far beyond academia. However, the idea has already faced strong criticism from some researchers in the geophysics community. Of course, you get that all the time when these first come out. So here's some actual water structure units. And this is my good friend Robert Pascoe, his company, Crystal Blue. And what they do, their water structure units, these are stacked up glass spheres, which they basically charge radionically and put special minerals in. And they've done a lot of experiments. These are from the Agricultural University at Sri Lanka. I've got all kinds of experiments they did at different universities. And he's given permission to use these, his work in here. And there's a lot of companies are making devices like this, just these stacked marbles. So anybody can make one. You just get a tube and stack up spheres in there. The micro vortices will do it. And Jerry Pollack has tested the water and shows that they do create exclusion zone water. But now here's gas discharge visualization, Korotkov's device, which is like specialized Kirlian photography. So this is well water before structure, well water after structure. So we saw in the Kelvin's thunderstorm, there's energy in the water coming down. So one of the things we want to do is when we develop a water lab is we want to basically run the Kelvin generator on water, then structure it, run again, see if we can get change in electrostatic voltage. So these are certain experiments. So there's rainwater before structuring, rainwater after structuring. So this is for real. We know that this stuff works. And basically, I'll read a couple of things here. We know structured water, transforms agriculture and livestock. It's being used quietly by a lot of large corporations around the world. I've known this because we've approached a few people talking about it, and they're saying people won't talk about it, but they're already implementing it but they don't want to admit it because that gives them their edge. So anyway, I'll just read a couple of the quotes here because it's probably too small. So this is from the Journal of Animal Science and paper Structured Water Effects on Animals by Lindinger. In the past 2 decades, has it been consistently shown that structured water, when used as a nutrient source for animals, results in many positive responses, including increased growth and productivity in agricultural settings. And this is from the Institute of Horticultural Sciences at the University of Agriculture in Pakistan. Structured water has been found to increase crop yield, such as winter wheat, 28%, corn, 17%, cucumber, 32%, and tomato, 32%. It increases milk production and fertility in cattle, meat, and egg production in poultry. It results both qualitative and quantitative yield improvement. So that's just simple water structure. That's like running water through something with a bunch of little balls in it. It creates vortices. It has these profound effects, which are basically mirroring what streams do, right? That's what Schauberger's work. So what's the world doing? Building crazy stuff. China's Three Gorges Dam, environmental catastrophe. I remember when I first heard this proposed back in the 80s, early 90s, I was like, oh my God, no, don't do it. You have to be insane. But of course, they built it anyway. Yeah, Three Gorges Dam affects regional precipitation. Who would have thought? As Three Gorges Dam created Chinese drought zone. This is 2011, right? This stuff goes back. When it comes to environmental change, the implementation of the Three Gorges Dam and reservoir is the great granddaddy of all change. Anyway, I want to read this Schauberger quote. Present-day science is following a wrong and dangerous path. First and foremost, it concerns the treatment of water, the principal agent of life. The existing methods of water control, power stations, and forestry are ruining water, the earth's blood. It becomes diseased and so affects its surroundings. Instead of progress, the future promises catastrophe. And we're getting it. And the unnatural approach. So what are they doing to basically ameliorate that situation? Well, they put like 40,000 high-tech special silver iodide jets spraying silver iodide in the air all over Tibet. So they've turned Tibet and Plateau into a rain-making generator. And they're using drones and missiles and planes and all sorts of other things. And basically to try to fill the rivers, but then you're getting too much rain, you're getting flooding, you're getting disaster, right? You're trying to manage it using backward technology. And also they're building dams down along these other rivers up inside their border, right? They want to control all the water of Asia by doing this. So it's terrible. And then people saw what happened in Dubai a couple months ago, that big rain there, because they were cloud seeding. But if you actually looked at the rain, I went and watched the weather maps, that actually came down from over Pakistan, and probably the origins of it were probably up around here. It just built up when it got down to Dubai and locked up over them. So that's the unnatural approach. We take the natural approach. You know, on the left, Dr. Wilhelm Reich with his cloudbuster. So he objectified life energy and scientific discoveries, you know, the orgone. Here's this orgone accumulator box, right? Discovered layers of, basically organic and inorganic material like fiberglass and steel. Basically accumulate orgone energy. It's like a capacitor or a condenser, if you want to call it that. So he developed a cloudbuster, long metallic tubes that connect to groundwater, either deep wells or flowing water, to make it rain or chase clouds away. So Trevor Constable, who was my mentor and I worked with for many years, this is the book I did with him in '94. This came out on the development of his work. So he, instead of using the water ground, because he was doing the experiments on ship, he was the chief radio officer for Matson Lines on their flagship, the SS Maui. And the Commodores, because of his professional stature, right, they're, okay, well, if you're doing this, you can go ahead and do it. But one of them finally said, because he was running tubes, he had different resonant tubes and dribbling water through it. And one day the guy said, he said, you're a smart guy, get rid of the water. So Trevor figured, okay, right, so we went to geometric orgone accumulators. So where Reich was grounding to water, Trevor was grounding to the chemical ether, which the chemical or tone ether is like the etheric relationship to the water element on the planet. So basically, this was the new way to move forward. So I work with bioarchitectural firms. So we apply this science in architectural design so that the buildings and compounds layouts, they harmonize earth and sky by their very nature and the materials. So rather than just doing, because Trevor, he was a military historian, right? Everything was like a weather operation and a weather gun. And I thought, well, no, it's great because it's teaching and doing it, but there had to be a way of moving this forward. And I thought, into building design and community design, garden design. This is where we can apply these principles. Everybody can do it in their garden, even a small patch. Just start working with this yourself. So the ethers, this is Rudolf Steiner's, there's a whole history of the ethers we can think of, from the hydromechanical ether, where they're trying to figure out about transmitting light, and the ether drift experiments, which they lied to you about because they did detect the ether in the Michelson-Morley experiment, only about 1/4 to 1/6 of what they expected, but it wasn't null. But these ethers are the living ethers, the levity forces. And the levity force, you never hear about that in science, but under Galileo in the Accademia del Cimento, they issued what they called the contra levitatum maxim. You weren't allowed to speak of the ether or the levity forces, only that which could be weighed and measured was allowed into scientific thought. And that became sort of the dictum of modern science over the last couple hundred years. So basically, the weather engineering is working with the tone or chemical ether, harmonizes structures, development of phenomena. So these four ethers are basically, as Steiner saw them clairvoyantly, but you can see them basically operating. And in one simple example I like to give to people, if we look at like the warmth ether and the light ether, and you can see them in a fire, right, functioning in a fire. So if you look at a log fire, where the logs have burned down a bit, and there's basically, you have the red glow coming out the bottom, the warmth, and the light ether, right, the pointy lights pointing up, right? You can start seeing these patterns and things, and the way that water flows in the vortex is not just because of the water itself, it's because its relationship, the water element, with the tone ether, because it does that. And of course, then the tone ether is all part of the structural elements within our body with the water. So here's Earth's breathing cycle. This is the chemical tone ether, which is kind of essential when you're working with like weather engineering or knowing how the Earth works. So at sunrise, the chemical ether is exhaled from the Earth into the atmosphere, causing maximum vertical current, electric current, which is the etheric current, always flowing down from the sun. Potential gradient, barometric pressure. So that's when barometric pressure is highest. And then it breathes out into the air, chaoticizes. I just slide slightly out of order. And then at sunset, it comes back in, rushes back into the Earth, causing maximum, again, vertical current, barometric pressure, surface. So those are the dew points. When it breathes out at dawn, breathes in at dusk, that's when you get the dew points in the mist. That's the chemical ether causing that in the breathing of the Earth. So during the day, it's up chaoticizing the other ethers and helping bring life and energy into everything. And at night, it's in a dormant state within the Earth. This is from Gunther Vaxsmith's Etheric Formative Forces on Cosmos, Earth, and Man. And this is Milner and Stewart's Loom of Creation. So this shows idealized, this is how the ethers sort of operate in the Earth. Red's the warmth ether on the outside. Yellow is the light ether, dominates the inner atmosphere. Blue, chemical ether, ocean periphery. And brown, negative life ether. I'm not sure why they called it that, but it was the way they did it in the book. It's within, dominates solid Earth. And then green's the etheric zone in which life processes are enacted. So during the day when the sun, these all interact in blue and yellow. So the green that we see in the vegetation is the effect of these ethers working together and chaoticizing through the day. This is a very basic thing. Just want to give you a general idea. I've been studying these for almost 40 years, and I'm still trying to figure them out, but I understand the basic principles of them. But I like showing this because you think of gravity, like Newton, if he thought, well, how did the apple get up? So there's gravity and levity. So gravity, we know, is real simple. It falls down, but levity is a life force, and according to science, it doesn't exist, right? As Trevor Constable used to say, he goes, you go to the greatest medical Western universities, in Europe and America, he said, they can't tell you the intrinsic difference between a corpse and a living person. He said, they tell you food is fuel. He said, but you stuff a corpse with fuel. He said, doesn't get up and start running. He said, but you go to Hong Kong. He said, even the street sweepers are practicing qigong and stuff. He said, they know it because it's an essential part of their cultures. So anyway, so that's ether's the life force. And so where is levity? Where is the levity force? Well, when we light a candle, we see the levity forces are trying to go up, right? You try to stop them, it hurts, right? There's a lot of power to them. And depending on the chemical elements gives you the shape. But when you get up into the thermosphere, the upper layer of the atmosphere, the flames no longer point up, they're a ball. Because that's where the levity balance point is on the planet for the ethers. So we can start trying to understand this. We're looking at certain scientific experiments. So when first I saw that, I knew exactly what was causing this. So this is the interrelationship between the elements and ethers. And on the right, so these pictures on the left, these are from Steiner and Gunther Vaxsmith. So these are patterns that you can actually see within nature when you begin to understand the ethers and how they operate. I gave couple examples. And these elements, the ones I use for the elements, these are the Vedic tattvas, which are actually the original chakras, right? This is the Muladhara, Svadhisthana, the Manipura, and the Anahata, which actually has a six-pointed in the middle. The modern rainbow chakras were actually invented in 1967 by Christopher Hills on his misconception of Newtonian physics. But everybody loves them, so they look cool. So if you like them, that's good with me. It's what we call upaya in Buddhism, right? The true Buddhist tantras are not Shiva and Shakti, right? Because that's all world-creating illusory stuff. It's actually prajna and upaya. Upaya being the male principle of right action. And right action doesn't mean you do something perfectly right. It means you take the right action for the circumstance to move everything forward. If you do it with prajna. Prajna is a feminine principle, wisdom. So when those two are working together, that's what you get. So anyway, so these are from the past, these are like from the future. I use those as a symbolic format in meditation for going deeper into the archetypal forms. So I think, yeah, basically, the warmth ether and the fire element, it's like a Janus-headed thing that holds us together. So think of a piece of wood. Wood was formed, warmth ether was part of the formation of it and holding it together. But you light it, right, with the fire, right, the fire element releases the ether back up. And what's left, so the hot stuff goes up and all you have left is the carbon thing, the element that was there. So in a sense, warmth controls our ego. Steiner said that warmth controlled the ego for us because, if our warmth is out of range, we lose our ego, meaning we die, right? So light is on things, air is in between things. There's these whole characteristics. This is from Ernst Marty's For Ethers book. So you can get into that to continue these ideas. So like, tone ether, discrete, water's continuous. Tone forms like a tree, water's like the river. So you see the relationships between element and ether. And out of that, all these different living forms, biological forms, are what we get. And I like to use this as sort of a meditative process. So we think of a tree, and the way the ethers work, the ethers are subject to astronomical conditions and atmospheric conditions. So a tree, right, is like the elements. The elements are rooted in the earth. They're solid in that sense. But like the top of the tree depends on how these ethers are operating, whether it's day or night or what season or any of that stuff is happening. And as we know from more complex things, from like biodynamics and things, certain days are better for planting, picking fruits, all of that. There's this whole cosmic intertwining because they're mobile. These are rigid. That's the difference. And that's why science can't see any of these, because it can only think in rigid terms and thinks it's a joke when you try to think just in the pure archetypal forms. But as Trevor used the chemical or the tone ether, and these are the different devices that he used once he quit running water through his tubes. We called these the MT bazookas, he said, because they're empty. So he had great names. He used to have these ones he put up on the top of the car, and I might even have a picture on one of these. And they're driving up and down Highway 5 in California. I used to see his friend Irv Trent driving sometimes. And they put pure sewers on there. He says, as people look up, they see the word sewer. They don't think about it, even though you're like engineering the rain with these. So these are just different devices that Trevor developed over time. Started with straight. These bazookas, I've worked with these up in Northern California. They were actually really good. So these different spinning devices, they're always experimenting, different variations. And these here, the spiders, remember he called me one day excitedly from Hawaii, because right, that's where they went between LA and Hawaii on the ship. And he got into Hawaii, and he said that when they were testing the device down in the hold of the ship in the machine shop, because they just finished building it. Lou Matta was the engineer that was doing all the work with them. And they were just running it just to make sure that the motor was smooth, and just watching it, marveling at their little toy they just made. And Trevor went up outside, and the thing made it rain, as though the ship was invisible to the etheric process of the geometry. And that's what they found. They could make these. And eventually they went airborne, and they make these things. They're like 22.5 inches, what they call the P gun. And that's what we're showing on this. Basically, you strap it on an airplane. So it's basically plastic and metal. And you strap it on an airplane made of plastic and metal. And you fly. And they did this test. We have this on video. And in the morning, they've got the weather report. And they're going, surf report, go snorkeling. Have a picnic at the beach. Don't worry about it. The evening report going, flash floods. Wow, it was weird, And so there was this, right here, there was this like weird column of storm showed up and made it rain over the island. So for sure, we know that this stuff works. We've seen it many times over the decades, and many people in this room have actually done this work. So these were sort of the origins of it. I like this here. China builds world's biggest air purifier, and it seems to be working. 100-meter high air purification tower in Xi'an in Shaanxi province helped reduce smog levels in the city. Preliminary results suggest, right? So 10 square kilometers. So what it is, it's a giant fan, and this down here wasn't finished, just big greenhouses. So they run greenhouses, and they run a fan through a greenhouse. So they take the polluted air, run through a greenhouse, it gets some oxygen, cleans 10 square miles. It's like wow, great. What are you doing in a giant city like Xi'an, right? Or what about Beijing, Shanghai? This thing would do nothing. So what was Trevor doing? Operation Clincher. Yeah, record seasonal reduction of smog, 1990, Southern California. We filed this 6 April, 1990. So basically, here's the goal. This was National Oceanic and Atmospheric. So this is official filing, which was required at the time for weather engineering on land. And primary energy vortex generating unit, SPIDER. No chemicals or electromagnetic radiation employed. Techniques are biogeometric and proprietary. 6 to 9 SPIDER units will be operated from Southern California bases 1 May to 31 October. Operation goal is to produce drastic reduction of air pollution. Minimum goal, 15% reduction under 89. So that's what he filed in advance. What we got was 1990 smog season had cleanest air on record. So verified evidence of operational results. And this is a book I did with Trevor on basically the different operations and the results attained, just so show that it actually works. And it wasn't so much that we were trying to push weather engineering. We wanted to show that there's a new science developing, a nascent science, and this is one step towards doing that. So what year was this? It's funny, 86. There was an, I can't remember, Operation Pincher. He did Operation Pincher then. That was the first one I was involved in because I had taken over Borderland Sciences, and I was out driving on Highway 5 near Vista, California, where I lived, and I knew about Trevor's work. I was familiar with it. I'd read Cosmic Pulse. And I see this old, basically Ford Ranchero driving with some of these tubes in the back, and I see this old guy driving. So I get home and I called Trevor. I said, hey, Trevor, I was just, some guy's doing the same thing you are. I saw it on Highway 5. He goes, I'm going to let you in on what we're doing here. And he started faxing me all this stuff. This was back in the fax days. He goes, that's Irv Trent, my good friend who I met and became good friends with. And they're running this Operation Pincher. And what they're trying to get a pincher, they were using certain units out in the desert, bring up over the Banning Pass. And then Irv was running units up and down Highway 5, and they were to bring them together to make it rain on July 29th in LA, which he had filed like in April or May. He was going to make it rain on April 29th because that's when he was off the ship. He wanted to be there when it rained. And sure enough, it rained on April 29th as he had engineered it, predicted it like 5 months early. The funny thing was, I was actually in Chicago. Went to Chicago for the U.S. Psychotronics meeting. And when I was driving back out of Salt Lake City, I got a flat tire. And I saw the road, and I could see in the desert, I could see this big storm coming from far off. It was basically Trevor's storm. Right after it came out of LA, it came up. And it's like I got doused. I had to wait for the storm to pass over me so I could change my tire. I got back, I told Trevor about it. He's like laughing. He goes, ah, he goes, that's as real as a punch in the nose. Yeah, for sure. But we can all cloud bust, ocular cloud busting. We have a visual ray. And Trevor taught me this, but I also found it in Ernst Lehr's book, Man or Matter, which I recommend as one of the greatest books of spiritual science to read. And we can actually measure this. I show this in my talks on optical theories and light theories. We have a beam that comes out of our eyes, and you know, there's actually, there's a guy who did the electrophysiological research on the evil eye, where he was actually developed these goggles where he could measure the beam coming out of the eye, and we know, everybody knows when they're being stared at. Rupert Sheldrake's done work on this. And I've done this for decades where you can basically stare at clouds and move them around or make them disappear. It works better if you're standing on the ground in bare feet. So it shows our interaction. So Schauberger, we need no science of formulas, but a science of forms. We've been looking at different vortices. This is a vortex fountain that my associate Juan Schlosser built at Akasha Restaurant in Ubud, Bali. And I first went there in 2016 when they opened the restaurant. And I was there about 2 days and it started raining. Incredible. Big rains came in. And there was lightning hitting the ground right in front of this thing. And I said, did that ever happen before? And Juan goes, I don't know. That's the first time we ran it. I said, well, that's what was actually happening around some of Trevor's vortex stuff, right? That was one of the complaints from the orgonomists, that Trevor's stuff wasn't grounded and he was getting a lot of lightning. But this thing, they've turned into a planter, so they didn't maintain it, unfortunately. But when this thing ran in good condition, it would actually, create atmospheric effects. So that was one of the things I always want to do, is do flow form fountains around the world, to balance, harmonize. So where do we get the geometry from? Cosmological botany. So this is Lawrence Edwards' work from here in the UK. So he did, tree buds change form rhythmically. The rhythms are those of the alignment of the moon with bodies of the solar system. A specific tree or flower changes the form of the buds in the rhythm of the lunar alignment with a specific body. Oak changes with Mars, beech with Saturn, birch with Venus. So cosmological botany shows from first mathematical principles the successful description of biological form. This implies DNA alone cannot alone be the propagator of living form, right? It comes from without, not within. Random processes cannot alone drive evolution. So there we see a graph, right? This is just when the moon's in alignment or opposition, right? It's when you get the most perfect form. There's the ethereal space of path curve surfaces. So this is where we get the path curve geometry from. And we're going to see the expression of this now in practical terms. So this is the first prototype of our biovortexer for BioArc. And this uses both mechanical and self-sustaining vortex. So we started with a path curve vortex at the start, and then a special path curve egg shape hyperboloid in there that we basically creates a self-sustaining vortex. So these were the preliminary. We wanted to see how the flow patterns went. The units now, they're basically silver-plated copper encased in bioepoxy using special mineral layers to create charge. So we're just building these by order right now, but we know that we're just doing the testing, but we believe we've developed a specialized unit. So basically, so we use both. The mechanical vortex, forces water into a double spiral. So most things like the one I showed you with the marbles in there, that's a forced vortex. Self-organizing vortex, that's what happens in rivers and streams. So we give this the capacity to self-organize within, and then when it comes out, we spin it around an egg to focus it back into the flow. So we believe this is the first real self-organizing one that's out there. Everything else is basically doing the forced vortex. So in time, these will be available on the market. I'm just showing that this is where there's practical uses of this technology. It's taking many long years to bring it to fruition, but we don't give up. So these are log periodic antennas. Some of you people in here know about this and have used these. So these are basically, we make these little antennas. We've done a lot of research on them over the years. So nature works on log periodic antennas. Logarithmic is what it means. Frequency independent, virtually independent range, continuous coverage of broad range of frequencies, radiation pattern generates virtual projection. So not just, so infinitely outward, infinitely inward by inverse square. So literally goes to edges of the universe, even though very weak, but that's where homeopathics operate from. So many insects have log periodic antennae as their natural interface with Earth's magnetic field, which is why do you think all the insects are dying off, right? Because they're basically getting buzzed with these frequencies right in their normal living natural bands. So there's just different ones we've worked with. So these are the effects of them. Like on the phone, we've done testing with them, and we haven't done them, other people have independently. So basically ameliorates the biological response, and this is from heart rate variability monitor. There's a lot of other tests. This is just visually easy to see. So I did many years of research on Minkowski's multiple wave oscillator, and we brought the sacred geometric aspect into it and found out that they operate without power, or when powered by the phone, it creates a more harmonic energy for the body. And basically we found, that basically orgone functions on sacred geometry. Life is sacred geometry. Basically, that's what the sacred sciences are. So we're integrating all of that in. So these are antennas. I ran into Vida Austin at the International Water Conference in Frankfurt in 2019. I know we had corresponded earlier through mutual friends in New Zealand. So I gave her one of our antennas. I wasn't expecting anything. I just gave it to her as a gift. And then she sends me a couple months later this thing, short-term water crystallography. So here's New Zealand tap water up north of Auckland. So with her technique, that's what she gets. So that's tap water after sitting on our BioArc disk for 1 minute. It recrystallized the water. So I was always wondering, what's the mechanism of these antennas? How does they work? And I'm starting to think that it's actually because it's affecting the water in our bodies, that the water is the medium that these antennas are going. So here's another one of our experiments. There's New Zealand spring water. So here's spring water after 1 minute exposure to Wi-Fi. Here's spring water after 1 minute exposure to Wi-Fi while sitting on top of a BioArc disk. It's not coming back perfect, but we're still getting, it's not chaotic. You're still getting some of the formative patterns within there. So we can see it's having some, and that's up sitting on the Wi-Fi, literally, which we normally don't do. So we know, and just to see, get the same effects from orgone accumulator of oat seeds sprouting in structured water. And these are antennas, so these are done at the same time. Identical sets of seeds sprouted at the same time, one on the antenna, one not on the antenna. So we can see that the golden ratio effects cause that. So everything, the antennas, the water structure, everything's built to the same harmonics, the polar radius of the Earth. And of course, why does it affect us? Because we are golden ratio, mammalian skull dimensions. Different animals, as you sort of come up the animal chain, you get closer and closer to the golden ratio. And in the humans, it's there to show that our relationship in the development of these different animals. Plus our heart shape, heartbeat. We know it's a vortex. We know it's not a pump. So yeah, even the systolic and diastolic intervals are golden ratio beats. So we're thoroughly, ubiquitously, golden ratio and Fibonacci series ubiquitously exist in every manifestation of life. So it's in the DNA. We know that the DNA is sacred geometric, golden ratio, pentagonal and hexagonal patterns. So double helix shaped mirrors, spirals found in sacred geometry. It's a biological manifestation of sacred geometric principles. And we know now that every DNA is surrounded by billions of water molecules, structured water molecules with a pillar of structured water molecule through the center. So it's basically water. And so DNA is a fractal antenna just like water, so they obviously are operating together and working together. So we are water beings, and that mineral parts of us, elemental parts that are in the other molecules, they're resonating totally with it. So this is an antenna system that Juan developed, which we call a DNA harmonizer. And this is basically, there's not just one golden ratio spiral, there's a different golden ratio spiral for every number. We've got articles where we can explain this more, but basically this is a DNA spiral based on 10, this is one based on 5. And when you overlay them, and we've only made some antennas, we made some test runs of these, which were one sacred cubit, 59 centimeters, too big to carry, or I would have brought one to show. But when you overlay them, they cause the phyllotaxis pattern, as we see in DNA and in sunflowers and everything. So we're calling these the DNA harmonizers, and we're working to integrate these more into technology. So basically, in antenna theory, these precision fractal antennas generate holographic field with radiative characteristics that project the same fractal spiral geometry both inwardly and outwardly to infinity, creating a seamless and harmonious pattern. So basically, we're looking at these for healing, for regenerating cells. People are saying, well, with all this sort of disruption of people's cellular structures over the events of the last few years, well, what can you do? Well, we believe with the technology we're developing out of this, we can restore cells to their natural state. So, impact of modern architecture on urban weather and health. So measuring impact of a city's buildings on the weather. Tall buildings influence climatic factors, need to create different microclimate and district. Effective high-rise buildings on surrounding thermal environment. Shape of cities shapes the weather. So just like dams, putting up a dam on the river affects the weather, well, building cities affects the weather, right? Tall buildings, dense cityscapes degrade the surrounding thermal environment through turbulence, uneven heating, and stagnant air. So, street heights, it's like backwards weather engineering, you could say. No thought is put into it. They just flash stuff up. So the solution is like regenerative bioarchitecture, right? Offers a paradigm shift. Designing buildings in harmony with natural surroundings and employing innovative biotechnologies to promote healing for humans and nature. I was actually contacted by a company in China, I won't mention their name. They were interested in how they might implement our technology into their tall buildings. They never got back. I sent them a lot of information. Maybe they're doing it. We hope so. As a friend of mine who knew somebody in the company said, your idea didn't get past an army of accountants. He said they didn't see any profit in it. So this is what we're into, regenerative architecture. By designing structures from comprehension of the intrinsic energetic aspects pervading nature, we naturally re-enter into a regenerative symbiotic relationship with our environment. This reveals the ultimate purpose of bioarchitecture. So this was designed for a center in Oregon. It hasn't been built yet, so these are computer renders from Juan Schlosser. He's the designer of these. This is actually being built in Bali right now. These are all being built, whether or not they do this as part of the design, but you can actually go and rent and stay these now at this place called Nuanu City. So the benefits of bioarchitecture: structural designs create beneficial field effects on health of living organisms, restores harmony between built environment and natural world, improves urban microclimates and thermal comfort, enhances air quality, human health and well-being, contributes to planetary healing and regeneration. So Juan designed this. This is being built in India right now. It's a Jain stupa. This is path curve geometry. This is the results of it because we see it in nature. We're taking it from that. So this is actually being built right now, and it's very big. We work with Mayank, who's a top Vastu architect in India and Pune. He comes to Bali quite often. But they wanted to do a new impulse, so they had one develop this. And it's basically designed as a giant etheric capacitor with earth antenna and sky antenna. Guru Charan Tirth is dielectric capacitor, harvesting potential difference between sky and the earth. And this is Juan's design of it. Here, metal positive, sky antennas and negative charge. So these antennas are all connected, right? The top ones are connected, bottom ones aren't. Centered on a crystal, so it's a giant capacitor. And this is the size of it. It's being built now. This is from April, so they've made progress. But what Mayank told me is that what they've found is they've been putting up and assembling this thing and got the outer structure. He said they're starting to get really light rains drizzling over the site, almost like this release of atmospheric tension, which they've noticed, so it's not like a rain-making thing. What it does is it's a harmonizing thing, so it's going to rain when it needs to. So, and that's basically their plan, is they're trying to harmonize heaven and earth through these, and they want to build a number of these around India and hopefully around the world. So this is the first one. So this basically shows how it is. This shows our harmonics with the oscillator and how it is. So this is where we're coming from. Our impulse is path curve geometry. Everything we're working along now is based on this, because this is where what we see in plants and animals. Yes, this is basically the petal opening. That's the whole idea of it. And here's another one that Juan designed for Oregon, which whether or not they build it up there, I don't know. But sacred science. So this is our sort of approach to it all. Our physical material world is the precipitate of higher forms and energies. We experience in nature's living processes the geometries and intuitions which emanate from this refined creative realm. And I'd like to sort of end up with this quote from Schauberger, which I love. Totally oblivious, I let the water flow past my searching eyes, and only years later did I become aware that this running water attracts our consciousness magnetically, takes a piece with it with a force that is so strong that one loses consciousness for a while and involuntarily falls into a deep sleep. And so gradually I began to play with these forces in water, and I gave up this so-called free consciousness and left it to the water for a while. Little by little, this game turned into a very serious matter because I saw that it was possible to release my own consciousness from my body and attach it to the water. When I took it back again, the consciousness borrowed from the water told me things that were often very strange. And so the searcher became a researcher who could send his consciousness on expeditions, so to speak. In this way, I found out about things the rest of mankind has missed because they do not know that people are able to send their free consciousness everywhere, even where the seeing eye cannot look. So that brings us to the beginning, right? We're just starting on all of this. So there's a lot of work has gone into it. We've tried to figure out a lot, but this is everybody's own individual path. We can only share what we learn and share what we know, but at the end of the day, when we pass into the ethereal realm, it's how oriented we are to everything. Not what we believed that somebody else told us. So everything I told you was just a suggestion, but I hope you were entertained. And since I was talking about Hydro Sapiens, I thought I'd throw this at the end, because we are Hydro Sapiens. It's amazing. But then I thought, well, yeah, we're kind of Aero Sapiens and Electro Sapiens and Geo Sapiens. Overall, I like to think Homo Luminous, right? Yeah. This is all the different sapiens put together, which is our higher self. So these are all aspects, and we could actually do whole day workshops on each of these aspects in our relationships and the anthroposophical sciences, but I just thought, what a wonderful way to sort of end it. And I wanted to really finish this time with, from Joseph Campbell, a great quote. I love Joseph's work. You are more than you think you are. There are dimensions of your being and a potential for realization and consciousness that are not included in your concept of yourself. Your life is much deeper and broader than you conceive it to be here. What you are living is but a fractional inkling of what is really within you, what gives you life, breadth, and depth. So thank you very much for your attention.